In honor of thoughtlessness, as featured in Belonging Again, how people can be respected for thoughtlessness, contributing to thoughtlessness, and the need for Hume's philosophical journey. Thoughtlessness is not a simile for dumb, as we learn from Hannah Arendt. To be thoughtless about X is to not think about it, to instead assume it, christen it an axiom, and the like. On the other hand, to be foolish about X is to get X wrong, to be illogical about X, and so on. Society doesn't honor foolishness, but thoughtless people can be called people of principles, people of convictions, and so on. In this way, honor and social capital can be found. Societies can honor thoughtlessness, which means it honors the conditions that make possible the banality of evil which concerned Hannah Arendt. At the same time, autonomous rationality is impossible, meaning reasoning which grounds and justifies itself all the way down. If that's the case, we ultimately must rest our thinking on something that cannot be translated into thought, something toward which we are thoughtless. Does that mean people of conviction who skip thinking are in the right? No, for not all states of thoughtlessness are equal. There is cheap thoughtlessness and costly thoughtlessness, as there is bad philosophy and good philosophy, to allude to David Hume. Section 1. Thomas More was executed because he would not forgo his principles. Jesus was crucified because he stayed true to God's will. Bonhoeffer was executed because he was a man of incredible character, and so on. For good reason, societies honor people who do not compromise on their beliefs. When asked for their reasons, people like More, Jesus, and Bonhoeffer could only respond with silence. Their reasons couldn't be rationalized. They lived according to faith in a truth that couldn't be understood except by living out that faith. Those who stood outside had to remain outside. Some of the world's greatest heroes are those of principle, faith, and conviction. And wanting to be heroic ourselves, we may also try to live by principles, faith, and conviction. But problematically, there's a danger here. Because if someone asks me, why are you against X? I can always reply, because it's my principle, and so absolve myself the need to participate well in democracy. In this way, I can use principles to escape working on the life of the mind, existentially difficult reflection, and putting my social status at risk. Democracy seems to be failing around the world, and various works by O.G. Rose try to trace out why, from Belonging Again to the Death of Process to the trans values of justice and love. Today, it's widely noted how little people who disagree with one another can talk with one another, but that disagreements are far from civil, and that now the game of democracy doesn't seem to be about finding the best solution, but getting my team to win, because my team is the best solution. Critically, the moralization of thoughtlessness might be contributing to the problem. If I am fighting to save the nation the Founding Fathers intended, for example, in many of my circles, I can easily receive praise and honor. It doesn't matter if I haven't read the Federalist Papers or biographies on George Washington in certain circles that I will likely be part of, given how much our ideologies tend to reflect our environment. I will receive respect and acknowledgement. In fact, the truth that I haven't read or thought about the lives of the Founding Fathers may increase the amount of praise and honor I receive. For a lack of thinking makes my faith and conviction seem all the greater. I must really believe in them. There can generally be a skepticism against intellectualism, for why do we need to think about something that we believe? If we think about it, that must mean we don't really believe it, right? Worse yet, in a communal setting, our thinking about X threatens everyone who ascribes to X, while our thoughtlessness about X threatens no one. In fact, it can confirm and support the people around us. Where there is thinking, there are possibilities of change. Where there is conviction, principles, and the like, there are possibilities of honor, confirmation, and community. Basic incentives favor thoughtlessness, especially when we have stories about men of principle like More and MLK, whose light we can see ourselves in. But were More, Bonhoeffer, and Martin Luther King Jr. really men of thoughtlessness? In one way, yes, but in critical ways, not at all. Section 2. The critical mistake is failing to recognize how much a man of principle like Martin Luther King Jr. spent thinking and studying. Bonhoeffer, Jesus, MLK, More, these are men of great learning, deep reflection, and abstract consideration. Their thoughtlessness, per se, came after incredible thought. Today, many of us want to straight skip to thoughtlessness, faith, principle, conviction, so on, without going through deep thinking first. This is a terrible mistake that is contributing to a collapse of democracy and honoring of the very conditions that are bringing about the collapse. What James Hunter calls substantive democracy becomes impossible. Tribalism becomes a badge of honor and sign of principle. We should honor the convictions won through deep reflection and dishonor the convictions held without deep reflection. We need to be able to tell the difference between these two. Ultimately, since autonomous rationality is impossible, we must rest our thinking on unrational principles, axioms, beliefs, and so on. To put it another way, since rationality comes after truth, we must ascribe to a truth through methods of ascension which cannot ultimately be understood purely in terms of thought. In this sense, thoughtless principles are inevitable, but how we arrive at those principles is everything. There is a cheap thoughtlessness and costly thoughtlessness, to use Bonhoeffer's language on grace from the cost of discipleship, as there is bad philosophy and good philosophy. It would seem that the difference between cheap and costly thoughtlessness has something to do with David Hume's philosophical journey, as described in Deconstructing Common Life by O.G. Rose. For Hume, there are generally three categories we must take seriously: thoughtlessness, bad philosophy, and good philosophy. We are all born into a common life, which brings with it givens and assumptions about how life should be lived that we don't think about, as discussed in Belonging Again. No one is happy who thinks too much, but alternatively, we can be taken advantage of if we never think, which means for Hume's we need to embark on a philosophical journey and leave the common life so that our thinking is not done for us in accordance with the givens of the community. But another danger is stopping halfway on the philosophical journey, which would be for us to visit the ivory tower and stay there. This is the bad philosopher, who never returns to embed his or her self back in a common life, but instead remains forever in a place of disembodied abstraction. Some sentences from Deconstructing Common Life might help make the point. Hume was deeply concerned about common life, about people living situated in local communities, families, and traditions. For Hume, bad philosophy is purged of the authority of custom, while good philosophy is critical reasoning in which the necessity of participation in custom is recognized and the authority of the domain of custom as such is affirmed. Good philosophy accepts a primordial participation in custom and accepts that reflection is subordinate to custom. It understands that philosophical reflection is not the source of civilization. Rather, it is civilization that is the source of philosophical reflection. The world today seems full of thoughtless people and bad philosophers, but few good philosophers, those who complete the philosophical journey Hume outlined. For Hume, the good philosopher leaves a common life to ultimately return, embed his or herself in one. This kind of person leaves home in order to gain the tools needed to defend it and make the most of home, not to return home and figure out how to correct home and or save home from itself. This doesn't mean there can't be criticism, but it does mean that criticism must help home feel more like home as opposed to tear the home down, to rebuild on its grave another house. The good philosopher returns home to be more thoughtful about it, not less. Section 3. Thomas More and Martin Luther King Jr. are not examples of thoughtless people or bad philosophers. They are precisely examples of who Hume would call good philosophers. In moralizing thoughtlessness, we have been honoring holograms of these heroes and use these holograms to make honorable the thoughtlessness and bad philosophy these heroes pushed through and often found themselves having to push back against. It is a terrible and horrible irony, similar to how we have used the mentally ill as justification to push for more autonomous rationality, not less. Idols are hard to avoid worshipping when they resemble gods. The heroes of our world were not perfect men and women, but it is critical that we hold them up as examples of good philosophers versus merely men of convictions, who were hence thoughtless. There are convictions, axioms, and principles in good philosophy, but there isn't good philosophy in thoughtlessness. And thoughtlessness contributes to the decline of democracy, spread of tribalism, and overall banality of evil, which Arendt saw was so dangerous. Thinking alone will not save the world. That is bad philosophy. And ultimately, we all must rest our lives on something non-rational. But we cannot skip the hard and laborious philosophical journey lest we become part of the problem. It will be tempting to skip the work because honor and praise is often given to those who embrace thoughtlessness outright, as it was no doubt tempting for Jesus to skip straight to taking his rightful place on the throne and avoiding the cross. That was precisely Satan's temptation in the desert. But if we don't take up our cross, our tomb will ultimately prove empty, not because we ascended, but because we ultimately had nothing to offer. For more from Belonging Again, please check out the playlist on YouTube, the list on Medium. And for more about O.G. Rose, please visit ogrose.com, Twitter, Anchor, Instagram, and so on. And thank you so much for your time.